Hey, Facebook, what is happening? We're back again for the Merge Marketing Podcast live on our Facebook page. We're super excited today because we have an exciting guest. We have Nicole Myles Brook, who's over on the East Coast, over in Halifax. She's a social entrepreneur, and we're going to dive into it today. She's got quite the story. I'm going to hand over the conch now to David, who's going to introduce our guest today.
Thank you, Jay. Hello, everyone. Thank you and welcome back to the Merge Marketing Podcast. Today's episode features another incredible entrepreneur. Lately, we've been so lucky to have quite unique guests on our show from different industries, which has been very insightful for us. Today's episode is no different, as it will be our first time discussing social entrepreneurship. Nicole Myles Brook is our guest today, an East Coaster from Halifax, Nova Scotia. By day, she's the director of marketing for Big Eric's, Atlantic Canada's full-service solution provider in commercial kitchen design build, commercial kitchen sanitization, concession and convenience equipment and supplies. Her skills as a digital marketer are evident as she has just led the team at Big Eric's through the build, testing, and live implementation of their new e-commerce store powered by Shopify. By night, she's the co-owner, along with her husband, Brian, of The Nook, an espresso bar and lounge in downtown Halifax, which is probably where the majority of our conversation is going to be centered today. So, Nicole, welcome to our show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, we're super excited to have you on today. So before we dive into some of the questions I would love to go over with you today, it would be really great to hear your backstory, and specifically, obviously, you can talk about your experience and position at Big Eric's as the marketing director there, but would love to hear how you got into the cafe business specifically. So start wherever you want to start.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So our foray into food service, I guess for us, it was a little bit anticipated in kind of, shaking out in an ownership capacity, but certainly myself and my family have been, not too far arm's length away from the hospitality industry. So, we were just chatting before the show started about Halifax and the various food and beverage establishments that we're so lucky to have in high volume here. And I spent a lot of my formative years growing up, from some of my first jobs right up until, obviously diving in as an owner of a food and beverage restaurant in that industry. And I think service in general, you have that calling to be of service or you don't. So I don't necessarily think it's something that I could have even put the brakes on had I wanted to. So we joined, my husband and I joined first a franchise operation called Jumping Bean, which was out of Newfoundland. It's a great small independently owned cafe franchise. We brought the first one over to Nova Scotia. Unfortunately, the spoiler there is that it didn't necessarily work out as we had planned, but it did really bring us into this industry and really gave us the opportunity to be in the position we are today as co-owners of the Nook. So we started, dipping our toes in as franchise owners, and then ended up owning and operating 2 independent cafes, which we now have dwindled down to one in the heart of Halifax.
Nicole, sorry, Dave, I just want to jump in there. Nicole, so when you moved Jumping Bean over from St. John's over to Halifax, what were some of the unexpected challenges that you might have faced?
So from like a very marketing centric perspective, which is always my go-to, a little bit of an unknown brand, it had a really great following in Newfoundland, So there was 14 locations across the island of Newfoundland. They had a really good whole bean commercial sale operation going right across the country. I think we really believed that it would perfectly translate as a kind of mainland Canada position. And it just, I think, and, David and I talked about this briefly before the show, but, in Nova Scotia specifically, and I think in the Atlantic provinces, folks are really used to chatting and getting to know owners of businesses, whether it's like someone, walking up to someone at a farmer's market and, kind of shooting the breeze with the owner there, and they want to give feedback. And we were getting feedback that we couldn't necessarily fully implement or have full control over in the franchise model. So one of the examples I use is we were doing, these like live music evenings, but we didn't have a liquor license. And, in a bedroom community where we started the Jumping Bean franchise, people wanted to be able to enjoy, these independent, beautiful music artists and have a pint or have that glass of wine with, a cheese board. And as we were moving a little bit outside of the framework that Jumping Bean had built their model on, we just kind of realized over time that the results that we were seeing and the inability to move too much outside of their framework was limiting.
I think the demographic is super important as well. Halifax is just known to have that type of environment, right? We were talking before the show. I mean, it's just the nightlife in Halifax is like nothing else. So, I would, at times I would even say it's better and bigger than Toronto.
Per capita, the East Coast definitely knows how to entertain and support people, right? Because we were all these small or, small and growing cities were built around, fishing and built around trades where people would go away and come back. And then there were all these celebratory kitchen parties, and you were always helping out your neighbor, and somebody had a fiddle and somebody could play the spoons. And, all of the cultural norms here are centric to those aspects that you described.
That's
awesome.
I think Classified summed that up in one of his songs as well.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Nothing like a Nova Scotia kitchen party.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you for sharing a little bit of the backstory, Nicole. So, like I said, today we're going to focus primarily, I think, on the Nook, and which is your cafe that you own and operate now, along with your husband. But you bring up an interesting point that the way that you got into this business was through a franchise called the Jumping Bean out east. And I know you referenced obviously some of the things that weren't working for you with that. And then that being, you had customers that wanted to do certain things like live music or come in and enjoy a pint or whatever it might have been, but it just wasn't working with their model of business. What were some of the other, I guess, pros and cons of getting into a franchise business? And that was the vision ultimately to get in, learn about the business, and then get out and open your own thing? Or
yeah. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I don't think the vision for us has ever been like a very defined roadmap, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs would be with me when they hear me say that, because I think as an entrepreneur, one of the things that you either have and love about being self-employed or you don't is that you have flexibility to morph and change and adapt as you see fit or as you see opportunity. And one of the limiting things, and it's not necessarily a knock against a franchise model, we have friends that own them and operate them very successfully, but for us, maybe as entrepreneurs ourselves, the franchise model felt a little bit limiting, and it wasn't anything anybody did at Jumping Bean head office. They are a great group of folks, and we've had an amazing, exit with them. Like, it was very amicable, and they're a great group of folks that have done the business. But for us, the framework and the roadmap that we had hoped maybe to lean into and have stability in just wasn't serving us here in the market, and specifically, I think, in the location that we had chose. Plus, at the time, we started Jumping Bean. That's all we knew in terms of ownership of a food and beverage restaurant. Then when we had the opportunity to buy the Nook, which was in bankruptcy at the time from the previous owners, we scooped it up, out of bankruptcy. We got a flavor of that indie model, and we just got hooked. And, to your point about kind of leaning into what is happening and feedback, the whole reason that our Nook token program had its birth was because, leaning into the needs of that community.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the term limiting there, Nicole.
I've just lost the ability.
Can you hear us?
The audio just cut out for a second, but you're back.
Okay, perfect. So you mentioned the term limiting, and that was one of the things. And I think if somebody's choosing to go the franchise route, or they're choosing to go, their own route, the independent route. I truly believe it's a certain personality type that needs to be geared towards one or the other. Like, if you're a franchise and you want everything kind of set out on a plate, out of a box, cookie cutter, good to go, and you just want to operate a business, franchise route's the way to go. But if you have any inkling to being creative and having your own name and branding associated with it, and you have that ability to brand yourself, and you're comfortable getting in front of the camera and doing all these things to help grow your following, I definitely think the independent route is the way to go. So my question is, what is it about your specific personality that you think leans you more towards that independent route?
Oh, I think for me, it's almost like, when I talk to other entrepreneurs and other creatives, the thing that always comes back as like an underlining, theme is always the ability to do it your own way. And maybe some of us have issues with authority, or, maybe some of us just want to break out on our own and test and try different things and not be too sheltered in terms of what we want to pursue. And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. Like, I had a history, obviously, of working in publicity and branding through, my previous work experience, and owning, my own small agency, that I knew enough to be dangerous in terms of the branding and PR and marketing world. And I think that lended itself really well as we were reinvigorating the Nook brand, because it's not something that we invented. We took it over, as I said, from previous ownership. But what we did with the brand was unique and was new. And when we launched the token program and we were leaning into the social enterprise model, which, to be honest, we didn't know social enterprise was a thing, right? Like, we knew people could be philanthropic and humanitarian, and we knew that people could be business owners. We weren't really acutely aware that you could do this very synergistic ownership model of being social entrepreneurs. So once we discovered that, it was like pants on fire. It broke us open in terms of what our purpose was. And of course, we all know, once you find your why and your reason for doing something, like, there's no stopping you.
100%. And so we're actually going to dive in a little bit in a moment here to social entrepreneurship specifically, as well as the token program that you came up with. But shifting into the Nook, away from the franchise model, can you tell us a little bit about the history of the Nook? Because from my understanding, it was around in downtown Halifax for quite a while before you took it over. So maybe tell us what it was and what it meant to the downtown community, and ultimately, through your branding and through your experience, what you've now turned it into.
Right. So it had two previous owners, and two previous, different but similar lives before we took it over. So it had been around for almost 5 years, through two groups of owners, and it had a really lovely community vibe. It was a safe space, for people who were in the LGBTQ plus communities. It was the name The Nook really does speak to the type of environment where we host our community members. It's a very small, cozy environment. It's on Gottingen. We're in the crosshairs of a bunch of different communities coming together, converging, various different socioeconomic backgrounds, that groups of folks that face different challenges on a day-to-day basis. And although it was a safe space for certain groups, it wasn't, the model previously didn't exist to fully service folks who might not have enough dollars in their pockets, who might not talk and interact with people in the same way that other clientele might, and so as we got in there and we were, reworking the framework of a for-profit business model, which obviously you focus on revenue, you focus on your top and your bottom line, we were broken open as entrepreneurs because folks were coming in and asking for day old baked goods. They were asking for, to avail of the restroom facilities. They were asking if they could wait out inclement weather before their next bus got there, and as we got to know these community members, we really sat down. I remember a conversation with my husband where I was just, my head was in my hands. I was like, what can we do? We have to do something. I don't want to be in the position where we're just saying, oh, I really wish we could do something. I wish we could do something, because we can do something and other people have done something. We just have to figure this out and tool this out and examine how that's going to work. So as I mentioned, like, we didn't really know what social enterprise was, but fortuitously or not, and whether people believe in fate or happenstance, as we were developing what has now become the token program, we hosted kind of a rebirth of our brand, like a big, reopening celebration evening. We filled the room with influencers, not only in the traditional, like, or it's kind of weird to say traditional now when we're talking about influencers, but not in the ways that we would think of as branded influencers on social media, but people of influence in the community, including some of those folks who do a lovely job on social media channels, but also political figures, folks that represented heads of these different community services and different groups of folks who were really the fabric of the community. And we were trying to explain what we were trying to do, and it's like we were figuring it out as we went, right? We had all these gift cards programmed, and we wanted to give these gift cards out, and everyone was going to take 2, and they didn't know what amounts were on them. And the amounts varied, from a really small amount like $10 up to $200, and the onus was to give away a gift card, not knowing how much you were giving. And the messaging and the kind of theory that we were going on was, you should always give, even if you're not receiving the same thing back. Like, it shouldn't be a tit for tat model. It should be a pay it forward type of model. So this kind of caught on. And one of the people that were in the room that night when we had this Light Up the Nook event was actually involved with the Common Good Solutions, which is a social enterprise institute. And they invited me to open up for Mark Brand, who is an amazing social entrepreneur on the West Coast, with Save on Meats and various other establishments in downtown Lower East Side, Vancouver. And David, I mentioned this to you. I was kind of like very scared at this time to be opening for someone with such a strong history. I worried if we misrepresented ourselves a little bit. I was like, we don't know what we're doing. Like, we're just figuring this out. And they were like, no, that's perfect. Like, that's perfect. Because he's the established guy with 10 plus years of experience in social enterprise, and you're the guys that are just figuring this out and starting. That's perfect. And so I was just like, it was like blind faith. It was like, okay, I trust you. And off we went to this event, and I opened for him, giving a talk, and we got connected. And I'm so happy I took that leap of faith, because he's become a really good buddy of ours. We've gone out to Vancouver a couple of times to meet him and his team at Save on Meats. And we've become, we stay in pretty close contact. We talk about the issues that we're facing, the challenges that we're facing. And he's lent us a lot of his practical experience of what worked, what didn't. And we were, so happy to be able to lean into that. So as in our formative months of developing the token program, I just really wonder how it would have shaken out had we not, fortuitously or not, crossed paths with this person. So I think entrepreneurship in general, and certainly folks who are, involved in social enterprise, the idea is always to do something that betters the community and that is really meaningful and impactful to you and those around you. But I don't think for a second that everyone has it figured out from day one. And I don't think people should be afraid of having it all figured out.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you've described a bit of the meal token program so far, which is an incredible program that you guys have set up. through the Nook. And I think for our listeners today, and for the entrepreneurs out there today that are listening that have businesses, this is a type of program that you can almost replicate in any context for any business, and it will work really, really well. So maybe we'll get into a little bit of the details on how to set that up in a minute. But Nicole, just curious, before we get into that, if you could maybe, now that you have a little bit more experience with what social entrepreneurship is and what social enterprise is, can you maybe share what it now means to you? Because I think they're terms that a lot of people maybe roll their eyes at when they hear it, and don't fully understand what it is. And if you get certain people that get into business as a social entrepreneur or want to run a social enterprise, they have that guilt of, well, I'm making money, or should I be making a profit off of this? So maybe just share a little bit of your views on that.
Right. So I think for people that don't know, and we were definitely in this position before, so no knocks on people that don't know what it is. So social enterprise is really a business that has, specific measurable objectives to, defined purpose for financial reasons, to make a difference and to have a bottom and top line factor. But it also seeks to maximize, not only profits, but benefits to society or the environment or a community or a certain cause, or like raison d'etre, or like reason for doing it. So you have a side of the business that might be separate, or you might have a synergistic approach. So a lot of folks would be familiar with like the Tom shoe brand, which was, they kind of holistically integrated the social enterprising aspect, where you bought a shoe, one for one. You bought a shoe and a pair of shoes was donated. It was like, the cost of donating the shoe and to those in need, and everything that went into facilitating that aspect of the business was integrated fully into the cost, or the retail sales price of the first pair of shoes that consumers would buy. Other aspects of social enterprise might be that a certain portion of your profits or your bottom line are donated to a specific cause. So we see, lots of B Corp companies doing this, like the 1% for the environment movement, where a certain percentage of your bottom line is donated to maybe another organization or body to help facilitate. And then for us, like we see ourselves in a little bit of a synergy, but it's not like every time you buy a coffee, a coffee is donated, but you can buy a coffee and at the same time you can suspend one of these tokens, or you can come in and buy a token to redeem at the time of purchase without having any questions asked. So when we describe how our social enterprise is sustainable and how it's set up, we describe it in a 3-pronged approach. So what we say is, we subsidize part of the overhead, obviously, for our operations and labor. We have a bagel and food provider that gives us raw ingredients at cost, specifically in the amounts that we would typically use for the token program redemption. And then our coffee supplier also gives us donates actually the coffee that we would typically use, so the volume we would typically use. So, and then the other prong, so it's like us subsidizing these producers donating or subsidizing the cost, and then the community members. So the $2 and $5 denominations that they spend to suspend either a coffee and a bagel token for $2 or a meal token for $5 rounds out that 3-pronged equation. So all of these different prongs come together and formulate this tripod that supports the whole model. So it would be really unsustainable for us if we were completely subsidizing the program ourselves, just because the level of revenue and the small kind of / medium size of our operation. And likewise, if we were completely relying on just members of the public or just our producers, there might be too much strain put on any one of those 3 legs of the tripod.
There's a several ways. And I want to switch gears just for a second, Nicole, but there are several ways that you're bringing awareness to the Nook, right? I mean, you have obvious word of mouth, the local influencers that are coming in and they're spreading the word as well, and obviously social media. You got a good following on your Instagram account. Maybe you can share a little bit of insight on what are some of the effective strategies for raising awareness.
Right. So for us, obviously, as we were developing the token program, we wanted to generate awareness and momentum around it so that it would, prosper and be sustainable. So we did have this, launch event, as well as we did a whole press junket. Once we had the word out there that we were doing this, we did, back-to-back interviews. So media, we got the media working to help us disseminate a lot of the information. Like we were doing local TV and radio, pre-taped bits. We were doing live, like iHeartRadio syndicated broadcasts, and we were, interviewed and published in like the Toronto Star and Flair magazine. And because of some of that, we also got attention for people who might have had local connections, but maybe lived elsewhere in Canada or in the world, sharing some of these news pieces and media bits throughout their social networks. And then it was, multiplying from there. And then honestly, one of the biggest ways, and I guess maybe a little bit unanticipated, was, part of the way that we distribute the tokens that are suspended in the cafe is through a network of community partners. So we have about 12 community partners that we work with. It's based on greatest need. So we might not give them all the same amount of tokens every week or every day, but we keep in very close contact with them and talk to them often about what's going on in their operations. A lot of them are non-for-profits, some of them are arm's length government, some of them are completely privately funded, and they all kind of touch different aspects of communities and members of our community who might face insecurity or who might face isolation. The list goes on. Some of the biggest, returns on quote unquote investment for this program has been through the membership and association, employees and volunteers talking about the benefits to their community members who actually patronize the Nook and actually avail of tokens.
Mm-hmm. So maybe if you could, because you've made reference to different aspects of the token program so far, so I think people can piece it together. But if maybe you could just break it down specifically what the meal token program is and how it works, that would be great, because I really do think that it would work well for a lot of different businesses in various industries. I mean, obviously, food and beverage being probably the best one. So if you can maybe just dive into that a little bit right now, that'd be great.
Right. So how it works, we've already talked a little bit about the three-pronged approach, so I won't go over that again. Yeah. But the basics of it are that we have these tokens. They look like little poker chips. One of them's black, one of them's white. One of them's good for the redemption of a coffee and a bagel with spread. One of them is good for the redemption of a meal. They're purchased for $2 and $5 respectively. We have these for sale in our cafe. So as I mentioned, people can come in, buy them for immediate use. No questions asked. Here's a toonie. I want, coffee and bagel token. Great. Here you go. $5 for a meal. They used to be able to be suspended in the cafe, but again, working out the kinks and learning as we went, sometimes it was so heartbreaking to have nothing in the little, available baskets for people who were in need. So what we switched up was working on the token distribution model. So people come in with a token to redeem, or they know that they can buy one and redeem one. So tokens that are purchased are distributed at the discretion of the purchaser. So if I come in and buy one, I can take it with me to distribute myself to folks I might, encounter on my way, or I can leave it for the Nook, owners and our network to distribute within, the approximately dozen community and social service organizations. So Nook tokens fight hunger because, people come in, they avail of nourishing food that they might not otherwise be able to avail of. It's in a model that's been developed around dignity and respect. So they have choice of menu options. It's not just, take what you're given and be happy with it and go on your way. I think some of the stigma that we try to break down is that, beggars can't be choosers. We hear all these kind of terrible one-liners for reasons why people don't give to people in need, or they're fearful that they're feeding an addiction or a problem, or they're making it worse. And I think a lot of that stems from ignorance. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean that as a society, we haven't done enough to break down some of the stigma, why it's there, and what we can do about it. So the slogan of the program is kindness is currency. And the idea is to pay it forward, pay out kindness, and forget about everything always needing to come down to dollars and cents.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so that's powerful. And so, I mean, really what I want to get across to people is like, this isn't necessarily that difficult to set up. I mean, you can come up with something very simple like you have, and then in order to fund it and make it possible, it would just be, a matter of reaching out to distributors, telling them what you're doing. You already have a relationship with these people, and then maybe they're willing to give you a break, and then therefore you can subsidize it in-house. Is that correct?
It all starts with a conversation. I think a lot of us are scared, and we've definitely been there too, to not having it all perfectly laid out or perfectly tooled out, or stats and figures to support it. Like, a lot of things we've seen entrepreneurs do start with an idea. And it doesn't have to be complex. It doesn't have to be weighted down by all these checks and balances. A lot of entrepreneurs figure things out as you go. A lot of marketers do the same thing. Like, you have a theory, you're a little bit of a social scientist, you hope your hypothesis works out, but if it doesn't, you record the results and you move on to test something else. So that's what we've done. We've given ourselves a little bit of a break in terms of giving ourselves grace. Like, I always tell people that I'm a recovering perfectionist. In my mind's eye, probably 10 years ago, I would not have tackled this unless I had it completely perfectly tooled out with like a business case and a business plan and investors and everything, marked down, T's and I's dotted and crossed. Like, that's how I would have approached this. And I think the grace that we can give ourselves is that as long as you're trying something to make the world a better place, to make your community a better place, you can start small and it can still have a big impact. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to have a huge following. You don't have to have millions of dollars. You don't have to be, hugely successful in other areas of your life. Like, this can go a long way if you're willing to put in hard work and you're willing to be vulnerable and you're willing to have conversations that are hard. A lot of conversations we had with these community service organizations really informed how we structured the program. We didn't want to further marginalize people. We didn't want to disrespect them by using certain language or certain vernacular or perpetuating something about these groups of people. So we did research, but we also just kept having conversations, and we have made adjustments to the program based on feedback from members of our community who avail of tokens and the people that help service them in other areas of their life. And, we've taken it from there one step at a time.
Yeah. And I think that's a powerful lesson for everybody to listen, like to hear right now, especially right now, as we go through COVID, is don't let your perfectionism get in the way of actually starting something and trying something new. And if I remember correctly, you had a pretty good phrase for that. And when it comes to marketing anyways, and that's your repeat and delete approach.
Yeah. Repeat and delete. You repeat what's working and you delete what isn't working. And you don't have to explain it to anyone. Most of the time, you're not under so much scrutiny. It's usually scrutiny that you've invented in your own head, right? Like, we're all our own worst critics. Most people are not thinking that hard about what we're doing. So don't be afraid to make mistakes. Like, especially, and I think right now with everything we're seeing politically and as a revolution with Black Lives Matter, like, people are very afraid to be allies because they're afraid of doing it the wrong way and, coming under personal scrutiny when really it's not about them. It's about this other group of people that are going to be impacted. So do something. Don't let fear stop you from doing something because of this veil of ego and scrutiny that you're applying to your own life.
Very awesome. Nicole, I want to touch on this before we wrap it up here, but you're doing so many good things in your business right now. You've made such progress in a relatively short period of time. Now, what is on the horizon for the Nook the next 5 years? What are some of your goals?
Oh my God, if I could tell you what's going to happen 5 years from now, I don't know if we'd be having this conversation, because 5 years ago, I didn't really know that we would be doing this. So I think for myself, and certainly my husband's been forced to embrace this as well. He has a military background, so he likes order and he likes planning, and that was 20 years of his life. But I think what maybe is so addictive about being an entrepreneur and being self-employed and figuring some of this stuff out is that that you can just adapt and change and roll with some of the punches, and that you might have setbacks and you might have things fall in your lap, and all of that is okay. So yeah, will we be in the food and beverage industry forever? Like, I don't know. It's a tough industry. It's a tough industry. There's very slim margins to be made as owners in general. Like, anyone can look up Restaurant Canada stats. You do it for the love of being in service to people. You absolutely do not do it for your paycheck. And I think for us, we will always look to opportunities that are more than just putting funds in our bank account, and we'll continue to seek out things that are challenging and that challenge us as people and as community members, because now that we know social enterprise, we can't unlearn it.
Absolutely. Well, that was amazing. I think that's pretty much it for today. Want to thank you very, very much for coming on today, Nicole, and sharing your thoughts and your wisdom on how you've set up this incredible program for your business. And if there's anyone out there listening today that wants to get in touch with you to find out more about setting up a social enterprise or program for their business, what's the best way that they can do that?
I'm most active on Instagram at Nicole Myles Brook. You can find me on most social platforms, either at Nicole Myles Brook. My name is not really repeated anywhere. So if you Google me, you can find me on LinkedIn and, Twitter and elsewhere. But yeah, you can always send me a DM, shoot me a line, even via, the Nook's Instagram page. We'll always get the message back to me in whatever capacity. And I would love to hear from people, because I think sometimes just soundboarding something against someone else who's done it the same way that we did it with Mark Brand gives you a little bit of belief that it can be done. And the biggest thing that we always hoped that would come, specifically out of social enterprise, was that people would be inspired to do it in their business and in their communities. And we've seen that happen in Halifax. Like, there's at least 5 new social enterprises that I think in some small way we can attribute to us jumping and waiting for that net to appear. So don't be afraid to try it, and definitely don't be afraid to get in touch.
Awesome. Jay, do you want to leave us with anything?
That's it, man. I think this is I think our final and last question you're about to ask David is probably I'm interested to hear the answer to that one.
Yeah. So Nicole, we like to end the show with the same question for everybody, and that is, if you could choose one person, dead or alive, to represent your brand, who would it be and why?
Oh, geez. That's a tough one. I wish you guys had fielded this out prior. Let's see. Who would I choose, dead or alive, to represent my brand? I don't even know what brand. Is that my personal brand?
Well, the Nook.
Yeah, let's use the Nook.
The Nook, if dead or alive. Oh God, who would it be? I don't know. That's a tough one. I think my intuition tells me to go for the person that we know, and we've attributed so much gratitude towards, and that's probably Mark Brand on the West Coast. He's another Canadian, and I think he would just do such a good job. He'd probably reinvent it and make it even better.
Well, that's perfect. I think that's great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, Nicole, for coming on today. And we look forward to having you on again.
Yeah, I would love that, you guys. And I hope you both take care and stay well. And we'll be chatting soon, I'm sure.
Thanks, Nicole.
Okay.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Well, there you go. There you have it. Nicole and the Nook. I think that that was a very interesting episode, and definitely shows kind of another side of entrepreneurship that we really haven't unwrapped before, right? Which is social entrepreneurship.
Yeah, and I think the biggest misconception even that I was under when it comes to social entrepreneurship is that you're not making money, or that you're in it for the give back part. And of course you are, but at the end of the day, as Nicole mentioned, you still need to make money in order to sustain the program. And that's okay. That's, you shouldn't feel bad about being profitable as a social entrepreneur or a social enterprise.
But naturally people want to give back. And I think the whole token idea and the whole business model around it, I think is brilliant. People feel good to give back, better to give than to receive. Right. So, when you're there and you're giving back, I think you just enjoy the whole experience of eating out or having a coffee that much more when in the process of it, you are giving back.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Absolutely. So what a great episode. I told Nicole when we chatted last, if I'm in Halifax this summer, as I hope to be, I'll definitely stop by for a cup of coffee.
Cool.
So
awesome. Okay. I'll leave it at that. We got some more exciting guests coming back to the podcast. So stay tuned. Keep following Merged Media, and drop us a message if you have a guest that would like to be on, or you would like to be on the show. Podcast@merged.ca.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Don't forget to rate and subscribe. Cheers.